I love drawing hair. I love painting hair. Long hair, short hair, curly hair, straight hair. It's my favorite thing to draw or paint. And I think what I love most about hair is you can shape it, you can move it, bend it, curl it. And with a little practice, hair becomes a design element in your art. It doesn't just sit there, it comes alive, flowing across your page as if moved by an imaginary wind, twisting and turning to tell a story or please the eye. Hair is magical, but you don't have to be a wizard to draw hair, honestly. It's pretty simple once you figure out the basics. The first step to drawing hair is finding your shapes. I think a lot of young artists see hair as thousands of tiny lines, thousands of strands of hair, and they think that they need to draw every single strand of hair. And no, that's not how hair works. Hair clumps together, creating larger shapes. We draw those clumps of hair, those shapes, instead of each strand of hair. Let me show you. There's an old illustrator I've always loved named J.C. Leyendecker. He was super famous back in the 1920s, and he had this amazing stylized way of painting his people. And I've always admired his work and tried to emulate it in some way in my art. See the way he stylized the folds here? They're very angular. And here he just shows the light part of the people and the black suit just kind of disappears. His babies were a bit weird though, but today I want to show you how he stylized his hair. Leyendecker would find the shapes in the hair and paint them as if they were almost made of plastic, like they were hair hats or something. He wasn't looking at the individual strands of hair, he was seeing the clumps, the larger shapes. He wasn't trying to copy what he saw exactly. That's not our job as artists. We have cameras for that. Our job as artists is to draw or paint the impression of what we see, to stylize it in a way that communicates, in this instance, hair. Not to draw every strand exactly as we see it. Leyendecker did this so perfectly, in my opinion, that it's a really good starting place for anyone wanting to understand hair a bit better. Okay, so now that we've seen what we're supposed to do, let's try and apply that by looking at shapes in photos. Let's look for the big shapes and just kind of outline them, like this. I'm speeding this one up because the very first picture I grabbed had a lot of little shapes and wasn't necessarily the easiest one to show for an example. But hopefully you can see how I was able to simplify all of that hair into smaller shapes. So the first kind of lesson, if you want to call it that, was finding the shapes, right? But lessons do you no good if you don't practice them. Apply them and study. So this is what study looks like. You can practice by tracing over a photograph like I'm doing here, or if you work digitally, you can do this much easier than traditionally by adding a layer and drawing over a photo. Or if you're so inclined, you can just draw from sight. You don't have to trace it, but practice a lot, please. You're not gonna get it instantly. I've been doing this for 40 years and I still think the shapes that I'm finding here in this demo aren't the best shapes. There's actually some that I didn't show you because the shapes were incomprehensible. Art isn't a science formula that works every time. It's a feeling, an impression, and some days it works and some days it doesn't. And practice is the only thing that will ensure that the days where things work outweigh the days where things don't work. Practice doesn't make perfect, but it makes you better, more confident, and quite honestly, happier with your art. So I'm going to use this one as an example of not finding good shapes. I've slowed it down to real time and you can see that I'm just struggling. I'm not really finding interesting shapes. And that's the thing, is you're looking for interesting shapes, not just shapes, but interesting shapes. And part of it could be the quality or lack thereof of the printout. I'm not able to see the details that I normally would on a screen. But fortunately, I've actually drawn this before for the Gothic Vampire. This is the model that I use for the Gothic Vampire. So let's look at the shapes I did for that. Okay, we can see I found some nicer shapes in the painting, especially in the back. But looking at her hair now, I painted her about 18 months ago. I think I could have actually found some nicer shapes in the front. I could have worked it a bit more, but that's life, right? That's art. There's no right or wrong way to make art. There's no correct way to paint hair. This video, this tutorial, if you want to call it that, is just how I've learned to do it. This is what makes me happy. Sometimes. Another thing is sometimes the photo reference doesn't lend itself to good hair shapes. In other words, sometimes it's not your fault. Sometimes it's just not the right reference. And sometimes your reference has wonderful hair shapes, like this one right here. These were really easy to find and really pretty, which is why we do this a lot. Not every one is going to be perfect. Not every reference we use is going to be wonderful. Not everyone's hair is easy to find shape with. So practice a lot. Look at a lot of different photos, use a lot of different hair references, look at different styles of hair, different shapes of hair, but just practice. Oh, and one last thing, not everything has to be complicated. You can just find the simplest shapes, and sometimes that's the best thing for your art. All right, we've gone over hair shapes and we've done some practice. Let's do the fun part now and actually draw some hair. I like to think of hair as ribbons, long pieces of material that can twist and turn. It could be curly or straight. So let's start out with the line that we're going to turn into a shape. And this is a fun little exercise in itself, drawing a random squiggle and making a piece of ribbon like this. And now that we have this shape, and it doesn't really look like much right now, but once we start adding some light and shadow, it'll start looking like a three-dimensional piece of ribbon. I'll tell you what, why don't I draw the light source? So there's a light right here, move this down, and this is going to be our light source. So we can see where the light's going to be hitting. And it should be hitting here. So if the light is hitting there, then there's going to be shadow right over here. So the light can't see that part of it. So that part is in the shadow. And if we're thinking about it, pretty much that whole slope down there is going to be in shadow, won't it? But let's say that the light can also hit this part right over here. So this part over here is, again, in the shadow. And now we have something that kind of resembles a three-dimensional ribbon, we'll say, with the light sources hitting here and here. Easy peasy, right? So let's try this as hair. You can have curly hair or you can have straight hair, right? Now we're going to imagine this two-dimensional line as a three-dimensional ribbon. So we're going to add these lines over here to simulate the curling of the ribbon. And the straight hair is just another line like that. So what's happening right now is in my mind, I'm marking mentally where the highlight's going to be, where the light is going to be hitting. And now I'm just adding the shadows. So I'm not touching where that light's hitting, that's the lightest part, and I'm gonna just add where the shadows are. Isn't that cool how just a little bit of shading turns a two-dimensional thing into a three-dimensional thing? And the straight hair is just gonna have one spot where the light's hitting it. So we're just gonna feather towards that highlight. And here's where the light's hitting the curls, and here's where the light's hitting the straight hair. Okay, so the next step is when you're doing the shading for hair, you want to follow the flow of the hair. So your lines are going to kind of go in the direction of the hair. You're going to do little lines. We're not doing each individual hair, but we're kind of simulating the hair by doing these little flicks, whether you're using an ink pen or a paintbrush, or in this case, a colored pencil. You're kind of flicking in the direction of where the hair would be going. You might hear me saying the word feathering, and I think that's just, it's a term we used in art school, I think, but I'm feathering towards the highlights. And so the darkest part is furthest from the highlights, and you can start to see those little wisps of hair going towards the highlights, and it gets darker in the shadows. And that's kind of the technique I use for my inking. Okay, I'm gonna just speed this one up a bit. This is at double speed. But I'm gonna make another ribbon, and we're gonna follow the line. We're gonna see how the line flows. So the hair is gonna flow according to the curves and undulations of this ribbon. See, it's gonna go there. We're coming underneath it here, and then down there. That's what you have to start seeing, is you have to start seeing this as a three-dimensional piece. We got this curve here, and it's coming up there. And that's the direction that your hair is gonna go. So when we do the little flicks, when we do the little feathering, we're gonna start off with our highlights. Where is the light gonna hit? Here, here, and here. And now we just feather towards that highlight. Those little flicks of hair from the shadow towards the highlight. But I'm following the direction. You see how my lines, those flicks, are following the contour of the hair. So you don't want them to be in the opposite direction. You don't want them to be left and right when they should be up. You got to follow, even the shadows are following the contours of the hair. You got to feel like you're running your pencil or your pen or your paintbrush along that contour. Now, if you have really tightly curled hair, like afro textured hair, you're gonna have little tiny ribbons, like little tiny ribbons that are gonna kind of interlock or wrap around each other. And so what I like to do, and it's really fun to do, is you just make these like little, I don't know, they're like potato chip kind of looking things. And then you just feather to a highlight there. And you do this over and over and over again, and you get this wonderful kind of pattern, which is really, really fun. So that's what I do when I do afro textured hair or really tight curls or locks. And it's at this point that I remembered that I have a white colored pencil. The whole reason why I did this exercise on tan paper was because of the white colored pencil. It really highlights where the light's hitting. And so now I'm frantically going through and going, oh yeah, here's the highlight. I didn't need to draw a circle. I could say, here's where the light is hitting. But you can see, just a little pop of white really kind of makes it real in some way. I don't know why, but find your light source. That's what I'm doing right now, is I'm going, hey, there's my light source. But those little pops of white, the little bit where the highlight hits, where the light hits, it just kind of makes your hair really come to life. So save those pops of white for those highlights. Okay, one more, and this is going to be hair that goes into kind of a spiral curl. And you sometimes see that with people who use curlers, or some people have naturally this kind of curly hair. But these are really fun to do, where the hair just kind of spirals in a spiral kind of pattern. And I always love drawing this kind of hair. It's really, really interesting, I think. And so I'm gonna find the highlights, and then I'm gonna feather to them, and just little wisps, and find my shadows, and notice that I'm following the contour of those spirals. In my mind, I'm drawing on this hair. I'm following the flow of the hair, and I'm drawing in the direction that the hair is moving. And those lines and following that direction is what gives you the illusion of hair moving in that direction. So it's all in the brush strokes, it's all in the pencil strokes or the pen strokes. Keep it going in the direction of the three-dimensional object that we're drawing here. And look at how those highlights just make it pop, huh? I can't believe I forgot the white pencil. One of these days I'll figure this out. So that's kind of the basics of drawing hair, I think. Find your shapes, simplify it, don't draw each strand of hair, find your ribbons, then locate your light source and feather towards the highlights. Also, don't draw the same hair over and over again. Draw curly hair and straight hair, short hair and long hair. Draw frizzy hair and locks and afros and buzz cuts. Learn to draw every type of hair and learn to see the beauty in everyone as well. And most of all, practice. Draw every day, look at reference, study real life, and keep practicing some more. I promise you, your art will improve if you just stick with it.